So here we are. Hello, Tanya.
Hello, Stephen. How are you?
I'm all right. How's it going? We're
Yeah.
live on actual LinkedIn.
Actual LinkedIn. We are. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for having me.
No, so I always like to amble a little bit for the first few seconds, purely because I know that people are waiting to join. But here we are today. We've got a bit of a provocative, intentionally provocative title. What's the point of men? And just for those who are joining us here today, I thought it would be good to explain why we've done that a little bit. So I'll tell my part of the story first, and then I'm going to hand it over to you, Tanya. So I, a few weeks ago, wrote a post that was unusual for me, and it was about men's mental health, and it was about rates of suicide and things like that. And it was written with the intention purely of, if this helps one person to have a slightly bigger conversation, then that's great. And I kind of felt drawn to do it, but I didn't expect a huge amount. And then I posted it one Saturday morning, and I checked my phone at lunchtime, and it was going crazy. There were literally people in America, there was people all over the place commenting on this post. And that's never happened to me before. It was a little bit overwhelming, and it made me think, oh, what's going on? And then do a bit more thought about that. And then why don't you talk about your experience, Tanya?
So I had a very similar experience, which is why we're here today, isn't it? Connecting over that.
Yeah.
I wrote a post kind of off the cuff, actually, about an experience that I had where my car broke down, and I required a support from lots of different people. And it had me really reflecting on traditional masculinity, I suppose is the word to use. And so I wrote a post about it, just kind of shout out to the men who do actually take action in moments like that, because I really needed it. And it wasn't about being rescued. It was about people leaning into their strengths. And I was on the positive receiving end of that. And I felt like there's not enough rhetoric at the moment around positive masculinity, or, positively being a man. So I thought, well, I'm just going to, shout that out. And yeah, it went wild for a small creator like me. I'm used to, a couple of thousand impressions. This one's hit 26K and still going. So
wow,
that told me that there's something about this topic that is important to people. And over the coming days, I had a lot of messages from men saying, thank you for saying that, because I don't hear that very much in my world. And a lot of men, and that really opened my eyes to this entire topic, because I think it was just coming from a sort of a place of like, actually just shout out to you guys. But it stirred something in a lot of people, and a lot of men who said, women chipped in as well, so thank you for saying this as well, to be clear. But a lot of men in particular, I think there was some heartfelt connection to it, like, thank you for telling a positive story and allowing us to demonstrate ourselves in this way, if you like. I don't know if that's the right word, but almost as if it doesn't get heard very much. So, and it's very similar to what happened for you, actually.
I think maybe we should just say, because we chatted about this the other day, didn't we? And I was one of those people that your post touched, and I commented on it straight away. And then the next day or the day after said, I can't stop thinking about it because of the similarities between what happened, the unexpected response. Neither of us were looking for that, and then that happened. I think we should maybe just say up front, both of us are new to this space. Both of us are very aware of issues relating to, gender, privilege, race, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
And yet we still wanted to just open this space up today to have this conversation, because clearly something isn't being heard. And maybe if I just go back a little bit to what I was speaking about and why that happened, why I did it in the first place. It was that I go to once a month, I chair a group of business leaders, and we meet in person, and they're mostly men. On this occasion, later in the day, it happened to be that there were just men in the room, and one of the men brought a story about a friend who had died by suicide. And he was similar age to me, a little bit older probably, and it was a very familiar story about, we didn't really know, he seemed successful, etc., etc. And a few days later, I heard another story, almost the same. I was working with a client who told me some things, and it just kept happening. And I felt like I wanted to use I don't, like you, Tanya, I'm a small person on LinkedIn, but the voice that I do have, I thought, well, why, if I just say something and I try and be a little bit brave and step into that space, and there were loads in my post, loads of caveats about privilege and it was like all that up front. What really touched me was, I remember mid-afternoon on that day, there was a woman of color from America commented on my post and said, "Thank you for saying this." And I'm like, what is going on? So I'm curious, what do you think is happening here?
God, what questions do you need to chuck with strong questions in? We're like 3 minutes in. What do I think? It's an important question though, right? What do I think is happening here? I mean, yeah, like you said at the beginning here, I'm not going to pretend that I know all the answers. I'm new to this space, and really I've been sort of projected into this space by sharing my own personal opinions. But what I can speak to is the reason behind putting my post out about, which was celebrating men and their natural action-taking abilities and those natural strengths that we often find in men. Women have them too. This isn't an argument about whether men can be soft and whether women can be strong. We know that that is the case. But in this particular scenario, there was it was a traditional display of men came to help me in a time of need. Women also came to help me, and they delivered different strengths that allowed me to fix my problem. And for the men, that was, we're going to go straight into action, diagnose the issue, logic, emotion wasn't involved. They got straight in, and they literally, or they almost lifted my car out of the road, right? You can't see me here. I'm 5'2". I'm not going to pretend that I can lift my car out of the road. And that wasn't a situation for me to say, I'm a strong woman, which I am. I'm a strong woman. I can do this myself, because I couldn't, right? And if those men had stopped and said, don't want to step in because I don't want her to think that I'm rescuing her, I would have still been in the middle of that road with my 2 children in a dangerous road, right? So I was grateful for that, for them stepping into that version of themselves in that moment, right? And I just wanted to shout that out. So what do I really think is going on? I'm not sure, but what I can say is that in my experience, after we were all safe, I was really grateful to all of the people, the women and the men that had come to help me. And I gave everybody a hug. And something I noticed that I've been thinking about since it happened was, and it almost kind of, it actually hurts me really, because I noticed that the men were really surprised by my reaction. And I thought that, there's no thumbs up. I thought, that's the wrong emoji. I thought that was, a bit sad, actually. I don't know what was going on there, but I wondered whether they were expecting me to say something else. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe expecting a different reaction, maybe based on experience, maybe just based on a feeling that society is giving them at the moment. That display of that action, logic, strength that they stepped into in a moment of need, that isn't accepted at the moment by society. And so when I said thank you, it was great, grateful with some emotion. I was very grateful that they'd helped me get my children to safety. They were a bit sort of shocked, actually. And I've been reflecting on that a lot, because I think, were those men in particular just not expecting me to be happy about what happened? So that was basically knows. But so yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are there when you hear that. Is that, you know, as a man, can you relate to that?
Absolutely. And something else that's happened. So there's a really serious thing that made me write my post, is that if you look at the statistics for, you know, and I'm sorry to say this, any people are watching, but it's just a fact that men, I think it's under the age of 40, the most likely cause of death is by their own hand. And then there is a big increase in death by suicide of men in their, like, I think it's like 45 to 55, something like that. And yet in the society at the moment, like particularly, I mean, obviously I am white, I am middle class, I am able-bodied, heterosexual, blah, blah, you know, I tick all the privilege boxes. And that means that my sort of social network, it's not entirely white, middle class, but, you know, social network's a bit like that.
Mm.
And having heard for almost all of my life, really, that you have privilege, essentially shut up and stop complaining. Now, by my nature, I'm a professional coach. I'm quite happy to go through a one-to-one, face-to-face conversation that goes deep. Been through a fair bit of therapy myself, and those kinds of things. I've had my mental health struggles and found ways to overcome them, often through talking. But what I love about what you said, which has drawn my attention to something that was a little bit in the shadows for me, is leaning into your strength. And on this occasion, it just by chance, some men who were strong enough to actually lift a car, lifted a car out of the way.
Stepped into that and didn't get stuck behind, oh,
yes,
should I, shouldn't I?
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely, yeah.
And
exactly.
And so I love the way that you framed that. What's happened to me since I put that post out there innocently is I realized that there's a lot of pain. There is a lot of unexpressed, there's a lot that men feel like they're not able to say because, you know, privilege, whatever. Now, it doesn't do any other person down or any other group down to reflect that actually somebody could struggle, or they might not be expressing the best version of themselves because they've kind of internalized some story that they shouldn't express their masculinity, which again, we go back to, you know, it's not necessarily just men. It's like, you know, there are masculine qualities that could be expressed by all sorts of people. However, for today, we're just talking about men. And what I've realized is by stepping into that space a little bit, it opens up like that. And it's a bit of a shock, I have to be honest.
I'd love for you to speak. You told me a really lovely story about information about where this is all stemming from, or a concept that you'd read about where this is all stemming from, particularly for men of you know, men of this generation, men of our generation, and where that's all coming from. I think you read a book or something, and I've been thinking about that since you told it to me. I actually went after you told it to me. I went and told it to my husband, who said to me, "Thank you, because I feel seen." And so I just think that is a really important piece of information in this and something to ponder on. So if you'd be happy to share that information about that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So this, I was given a book, and it was called No More Mr. Nice Guy, which is an interesting idea. But to paraphrase sort of 100 years of sociological thinking, it goes something like, prior to the Second World War, most men would have been around men, most boys would have been around men a lot more when they were younger and they were growing up. So they would have been around their fathers and their grandfathers in the fields, or, you know, just generally, because that's kind of the way that society was organized. After the Second World War, also there was particularly in the UK and the US and Europe, in the First World War, a lot of men died. So there were fewer men around, and those that came back had had a very traumatic experience. So that had an effect too. In the 50s and 60s, we had not yet really seen the second wave of feminism expressing itself properly. We had a situation where men started to go out to offices to work. They came home tired because of the commute or whatever. They were less engaged in their boys, their sons and their daughters' lives. At the same time, there's a change in the way that schooling works. So you end up with a situation where I certainly had one male primary school teacher all the time I was at school. Hugely influential on me, but I only had one. Now, that's common across the Western world. So what happens is you end up with a situation where boys are learning to be men from women, because they are the dominant carers, the teachers, and their dads are becoming more and more distant. Now, when I heard this idea, it absolutely resonated with me. And the concept then is, well, what happens? And men start to express themselves in the way that they learned from their mothers, I'm going to tell you about myself. How does that express itself at home? It's like, yeah, I'll do the laundry, I'll tidy up, I'll do these things because I want your approval, right? So obviously this is like a tiny little thing.
Right.
And my internal narrative is, if I do these things, you will like me, right? And it's bonkers. And actually, talk to women. I'm not going to make this about me and my wife because that's just like too. But I've talked to a few women about this, and then what you discover is that there's this real confusion going on about roles. Like, how does a man step into, to your point, how do you step into your strength without doing somebody else down? Yes. And we talked a lot about how to try and get the balance better in the home. I know it's not perfect, better in work and so on. And we've forgotten to have a conversation about what is the role of a man. Now, there's one final little bit, because I'm talking a lot. This is why I decided to be kind of like brave enough to step into this space, is I also heard at the same time, what happens if, you hear this phrase toxic masculinity, right? It's quite a common, you hear it a lot. And you never hear positive masculinity, or I don't hear it that much. And I'm in a pretty progressive space online, and you would think, you stop and think, well, surely that's there. So if people like me, and I'm not saying I'm like some great influencer, but if men like me don't step into that, then what happens to the boys, nephews and sons who are hearing they're toxic? Well, they might be drawn to somebody, there's certain people online, of course, who would welcome, you're not toxic. It's all their fault, right? And it stops you doing the work yourself. So, sorry, I just said a lot. Did I actually answer your question?
Yeah, you absolutely did. And it's that piece around, and this is such an interesting idea to me, because I think about all of the men in my world. And I think that's probably true. They did learn how to be men through the lens of a woman, and then learned to step into the adult world and preempt. We had this conversation before, preempting the needs of the women in your world, and then being rejected because it hasn't quite hit the mark. And that's a different conversation, right? That's a different conversation. We live in this new world where actually, what does it mean to be? You shared a post about the I can't remember the name of the thought leader, but someone who had the 3 elements of masculinity, and one of them being provide, right?
Yep.
And I've been reflecting on that this morning, actually. And this is just my opinion and my experience in my world, and some people might disagree with me, and that's totally okay. But I've been thinking about what that means. And I think in my world, I can see that we have mixed up equality and being equal. They're 2 different things. I think they are anyway. I absolutely stand behind equality. There should be equality of opportunity for everyone in the world. Everybody should have equality of opportunity. When we're talking about men and women, that men and women specifically in the workplace, especially in the workplace, should have an equality of opportunity. But there's a grey area here when we look at the word equal, which I think people use interchangeably, right? And I'm quite happy to stand here and say that we are not the same. We're not the same. We're not. You're how tall are you? 6 foot, whatever. You probably can lift a car. I can't. There are other things I can do that you can't do. And that's because we're not striving to make men and women the same. We're blurring the edges there. We're rounding off the corners, and we're removing everything that makes men brilliant and women brilliant equally. Both of those. We're removing those edges and saying to women, don't speak to your intuition, to your creativity. You have to be hard. You have to be in the workplace. And you have, which, by the way, I do agree women should be in the workplace. But I mean, you have to use logic and action and be assertive, right? We're rounding off those edges for women, but we've also done it for men. We've rounded off those edges. Your natural state is toxic. Stop being that way. And you have to be equal. You have to be equal to women, which means you're not allowed to be action oriented. You're not allowed to be assertive. You're not allowed to be strong. You're all that sort of stuff. And so men are left in this space where they go, they've rounded off all those corners of what it means to be a man in the name of being equal. But in my opinion, I think we've got it wrong. It's equality is about celebrating our differences, not trying to be the same, because so that's something that, and people will disagree with me on that. I know they will, but that's the way. That's the way that I think. What does it mean then for a man when we're talking about the word to provide? If that's a natural, if that's a natural instinct for some, it's not going to be for everyone, right? That was very easy to speak to in the 50s. That was very easy to speak to and tick that box quite easily. I provide because I go to work. Tick, right? Yep. Now we live in a space, rightly so, where we're striving for equality. And that means that every household looks different. For some people, you have both parents. I'm talking about, I have to speak from my own lens here, which is a more traditional setup. I'm married to a man. I have children. I fully accept that there are people with there's a huge variety of families. In my world, what that looks like is both parents working. We do have children. That for some it's man at home, for some it's single parents, for some it's all sorts of, and that is right, and we need to make sure that there's equality of opportunity for all of those people. But what it has done is made it harder for men to tick the box, the natural urge to provide. Because if we're striving for equality, rightly so, it's not so easy to just tick the box. I go to work and earn the money. Tick. For some, they still can, right? But for others, and this is something that you can definitely speak to in your space, it's just an assumption of mine, but my assumption is, does that then mean that there's more work there, but it's actually harder for men to kind of dig into what does that mean for me? That I want to speak to that need to, if we're going to take that model that we were looking at, was it provide, protect? It was
from Scott Galloway, and it was protect, provide, and procreate, by which he means initiate rather than necessarily just go and have lots of children.
That's a different line.
That's a different thing. And I find it quite challenging, because a lot of my life has been, I've been encouraged to nurture, to use use feeling as a way into understanding and so on, which I think I've got some aptitude for. But interestingly, I mean, and like I say, I'm a professional coach. I spend a lot of my time talking to people. It's my job. And yet what I've started to do in the last few weeks is, with some of my male clients, is just step into this just a little bit more, and discovered that as I do, things open up for them. There's something opening up. I had a great example with somebody who was talking to yesterday, who told a story about how he has I need to anonymize this quickly, has a friend who's going through a difficult situation, doesn't live nearby. And this person related a story about mentioning to his wife that he needed to go and help this friend a little bit. And his wife said, yeah, you should go and take him for a coffee and have a chat. And he said, no, my instinct is to go and take him to play golf or snooker. Right. And then he reflected on it and said, but that's really interesting, isn't it? Like, if we have the activity, then the conversation will happen. But if, for a lot of men, if you went straight in with the conversation, it's just not the right way. And I just want to say one other little thing that, and I, by the way, to anybody listening to this, we're probably treading on all sorts of like rules that we're not supposed to.
But that's okay, right? Because these conversations are important, and if no one actually speaks about them, then how do we start that chat? So you and I are here, happy to put ourselves on the line and go, we don't know the answers, but let's
we don't know. We thought we'd be brave enough to have the conversation. So there's one, this thing that, women can multitask and men can't, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like a truism, isn't it? Now, you go to neuroscience and you go, well, actually, nobody can multitask. It doesn't work. Like, literally nobody can, or maybe fighter pilots. But other than that, like, nobody else can actually do two things at the same time.
Yeah.
But it gets sort of thrown around as like, men are useless because they can't multitask. I don't know if this resonates with you at all, but it's certainly something that's in the zeitgeist for me. Like, blah blah blah. And I was just like, either laugh it off or just say, I can't really speak to that or whatever. And recently I thought, well, hold on a minute. What if you just take that as true? Not 100% true, but like partially true. And you say, well, what's the alternative? Maybe, men are good at deep focus. Do you know what I mean? And just go, well, what's the alternative to that? Yeah. And for me, what it made me realize is that I hear those things and I have not felt I can say either that's not fair, it's not right, stop it, or, I just have to laugh it off. But actually what I'm hearing is men are useless, men are useless, men are useless. Now that's not really what's being said, but if it goes on for like years and years and years, you do internalize that to an extent. I don't know, how do you reflect on all of that?
Yeah, I find that really interesting. I suppose from my personal perspective, it's the equivalent of don't be a girl, or like, you run like a girl or whatever, except that I think as a society we're doing a really good job of like getting rid of that because it's very overtly against something. But whereas something like this, whereas women can do this, men can't, I can see that how that might dig into that kind of how you feel on a day-to-day basis about your natural being, your natural state. And I'm well aware in saying that there are marginalized groups all over the world that experience that every day, right? When we are not dismissing or diminishing that in any shape or form. But when we're having this conversation about men, I can see we're talking about those mental health rates and those awful statistics. Something has shifted here, and we don't know. We're not pretending to know what it is, but I think there's a conversation that needs to start, and there's definitely people who are hungry for that conversation based on the experiences we've had about coming into the world and talking about these things, and the response of people coming back and saying, "Thank you. This is a really important topic." So yeah, I do. I kind of hear that, and I think I'm just looking at my notes to check I haven't missed anything. But
can I just ask you something? Isn't it interesting, just that all we're talking about here is trying to give, like, if we zoom right out, what are we trying to do? We're trying to give voice to a group in society, and yet both of us have felt like 3 or 4 times today the need to say, "Oh, of course."
Right.
Other people, blah blah blah. Oh, of course.
Right. But that is the problem, right? Which is we need more people to come out and say, "I have an opinion about this," and that's okay. You can disagree, and that is okay. I respect you. You respect me. We feel differently about this, but that's what makes the world go round. And we do live in a world where that's very hard to do. Right? That is very, very hard to do. So hence the caveats that we keep putting on ourselves, just having. And I wonder if anyone listening is thinking, yeah, I do the same thing. Like I'm constantly like, yeah, there is that for every argument you make, there is an opposite and equal argument. Of course there is, but the fact remains that there's a conversation here that we wanted to open up, isn't there? Just based on the sheer number of people who stepped forward and said, actually, I need to have this conversation, right? And one thing that I haven't mentioned yet was the man versus bear argument that I actually wasn't aware of. But when I put my post out, a couple of people commented and said, oh, I bet you're glad that it wasn't bears that turned up to help you move that car. And I was like, the first one, I thought, okay, haha, yeah, it wasn't bears, like I took it innocently. And then when the second one came in, I think, oh, I have missed something here. So I asked and I said, what is this about? And was told that apparently everyone else knows this, but I didn't know this, that on Twitter and Instagram, there's a sort of a trending thread going around at the moment, a trending topic, which is that apparently when young women were asked if they would prefer to come across a bear or an unknown man to them in the woods at night, they chose the bear. And that makes my heart sink, because I can see how damaging that message, I can see how confusing and damaging that is. And this is in jest, presumably, for some people, except that it's not, right? You would rather come across a bear that's going to maul you than another human being, right? And so there's something has gone wrong here, and I'm not going to pretend to know what that is, but something has gone wrong here, because I don't feel that way. I had no idea about this, right? So there's these layers of messaging that we're getting from the world. We haven't got it right now. We haven't reached that stage yet where we can celebrate our differences and our strengths and lean on those and have those, because when we're striving for equality, what we're really looking for is those harmonious relationships where we give and take what using our strengths and what makes us unique between men and women in this argument, because that is how we create harmony and that's how we create equality. I'm going to help you with the strengths that I have, and then when my car breaks down, you're going to come and push it out of the road, and we can both be happy about that situation, because there will be scenarios where you require a particular strength of mine. Maybe that's my intuition, maybe that's my creativity. Other people have those too, men have those too, but those might be my natural state. So I think that's the key thing here. When I heard that argument about man versus bear, I just thought that's kind of hurts actually to hear, because I don't want the men in my world to feel that way. And I've kind of reflected on, I have a son who's young at the moment, but that would really hurt if my son was old enough to internalize that message. What's that for him and his world, and how is he going to show up in the world if he believes that half of the population around him may not feel that his presence is welcome at all?
Yeah. Do you know what? I'm so glad you've said that, Tanya, and thank you. Genuinely, for me personally. So for me, I'm a professional coach, and a part of what you do when you are coaching is you've got to figure out who's your ideal client, that kind of thing. And this whole thing blew up out of nowhere, as we said at the top of this conversation, blew up out of nowhere for me. At the same sort of time, I've been doing some work with a branding person, some other stuff going on in my life. And little by little, each one has come back to me and said, why are you not targeting men? Why are you not stepping into this? And for quite a while, I was like, no, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be in that space. But also at the same time, feeling drawn, thinking, hold on a minute, I've probably got something to say, having been through a few things in life where I've had to, not everybody would know this, I was a single parent. My partner died. I had to look after 2 primary school age children for a period of time. So I had to step into nurture. I had to step into all of that. And in the process, probably lost a bit of, it was necessary. It was absolutely survival. So it was necessary. But that's given me a kind of unusual perspective. And also, as you mentioned, like, I'm a fairly big guy, but I've been reflecting, I don't embody that very often. I don't do that. And I've even things like, I ran an ultra marathon when I was 49 just to see if I could, right? Run 50 miles, right? But at the same time, push away any any idea that might be an expression of masculinity, an expression of strength, an expression of power, potency, those kinds of things. It's all like, no, I'm doing it because I want it, I'm doing it because, and actually when I allow myself to think that, I'm like, there's a bit of me that goes,
yeah.
You know what I mean? But
it's
that's
actually
not
okay for you to feel like it is an expression of, being masculine. And 100%. Yeah, but in the world that we are in, it's not okay for you to lean into that.
Yeah.
That feeling,
it wasn't. And then, but I just want to say this, like, by the way, the best ultra runners in the world are women. No two ways about it. Absolutely. But they go about it, probably go about it a different way, access it a different way. And that's the point. How do you get into this?
Yes, exactly. I don't know about ultra running, but I would be willing to bet, someone please correct me, I'd be willing to bet the men and the women do it differently. There are different things they are doing because they're not equal. But there's equality there in that you can both run ultra marathons.
Exactly. Beautifully put. And so, like, just to kind of like maybe round up that thought that I was having there, is that I kind of realized and started to step into this space a little bit more with some clients. And what's happened is that has blossomed. And I don't know about you, when you've trained to be a coach, I've been thinking about this. I realized that it was almost designed to be blind to any difference in the sexes or gender. So I've been thinking back, did it ever come up? And I think, no, it didn't. And actually, we almost taught that it doesn't matter.
Yes.
And then, so just a little bit over the last couple of weeks, I've started to lean into what I know about what it is to be a man, what I know. And through that, a totally different lens on the conversation opens up, a totally different avenues to explore open up, different expressions of growth open up. Think, why am I learning this now?
Yeah. Yes.
But I guess the point is, what I've realized, and this is a long-winded way of getting back to your point, and the thank you to you, is you've really helped me to realize, thinking about your son and others, that I don't want to leave this space for the bad actors, and I don't know what on earth is going to happen, but I'm going to be brave enough to try and see what happens. But part of that is thanks to you.
I think your bravery in this space is really needed, because you said for a while you weren't sure whether to step into the space, but actually we need people to step into the space. We do need people, and I'll say first and foremost, we need men to step into the space. We need men to take that step first, and then others will follow, right? And I see myself as an advocate, and that's in the same way that I know you're an advocate for me, by the way. That's the point, right? That's the point. But I do see myself as an advocate here, because I notice with the men in my world what's going on, and we think about those stats, and that's not okay, and none of us should be okay with that. So we have to change, and we have to be bold. So I'm excited to hear that this is a space that you're operating in, because I think it's extremely worthwhile, and someone's got to do it. So I'm glad that you're moving into that. There's a couple of comments that I've just noticed that perhaps just a couple of comments. Alistair says, loving the framing of positive masculinity and leaning into your strengths. Yeah. So a potentially positive message for men of all ages that should not be incompatible with EDI. Exactly. It's not incompatible. It's not or, it's and.
Yeah.
If you say Joe says, if you say men and women are not the same, it 100% doesn't mean you don't believe in equality. We have different roles. It's very simple. So yeah, so I would add to say we have different strengths that are perhaps is the way to kind of articulate that one. And I think, yes, exactly. It just because you say, Stephen, you have different strengths to me, that doesn't mean that I also don't believe that we should have equality of opportunity. And then another one from Alistair: if you get the activity right, the conversation will follow. Excellent observation. I can't remember what that was on.
I think that's related to the go and play snooker, go and play golf thing.
Oh yeah.
It's true,
Yes. Yes.
And you know, I think as well that one of the small things, maybe we should wrap this up in a minute, but one of the small things that I've learned in the research and reading that I've been doing recently, and then I've tested it out with some friends and some others, is you mentioned about leaning into your strength, and part of an expression of masculinity, I'm going to stop caveating it, part of being a man, right, is to want to take action, to use your physicality. And yet the modern world doesn't really, for a lot of us, it doesn't give us that opportunity. So what I've started to do is say, no, we can't be thinking, I will get to the gym or I will do that run if I get round to it at the end of the day. We have to say, no, that is an access to your feelings. It's an access to your emotions. It's going to make it easier for you to open up. So prioritize that bit of your life.
Yes.
And then you will find it a little bit easier to talk, a little bit easier to express yourself, a little bit easier to show up positively in the world. But I think it's, I don't know, it's one of my first early observations in this space is that taking action, that physicality needs to express itself. There was another comment there. More conscious men need to show up in the space. Tanya regularly saying like it's such an important topic, and thanks for opening up a wider audience. I think we should leave the last word to Earl. That's almost the last word. Because I would like to say, just one thing, a little bit of a call to action here from me. So I mentioned that I'm starting to step into this space. I have a program, it's called the Next Level You program, and I have just begun to work on a way of subtly adapting it. So there are elements in there specifically targeted at all these issues to help men. So not fundamentally ripping it up and starting again, but I've realized if we put that there and that there and that there. So if anybody's interested in that, get in touch. Signing people up now. Did you have anything you wanted to talk about, Tanya? Any offerings you've got?
I'm not going to talk about my offerings because I actually think this is the space where if there's anyone who this topic is ringing true, Stephen's the person you need to talk to. So I'm not going to talk about what I do because I think in this space, if there are women listening who want to talk about leadership, that's different. You come and talk to me, But actually, I think the whole thing here is that we need, like Earl has said, we need more conscious men. How do we do that? Well, we have conscious men like yourself, Stephen, who are stepping into that coaching role specifically for men to support them to navigate this situation. So I think if it's a topic that's ringing true and it's stirring something for anyone watching, then Stephen's the guy that you need to talk to.
That's very kind and true. Right, I am going to close it out properly now. Tanya, I'm going to find it a little bit difficult to express just how grateful I am to you for doing this. You, by stepping into this space and allowing this conversation to happen in the way that it's had, it couldn't happen a different way. And you have given a real gift to everybody that's listening here today. I think it takes a bit of bravery on your part, or like stupidity, one of the two.
It's probably we'll find out afterwards, won't we? I'll let you know.
But the way that you have expressed everything that you said today is really beautiful and is done with such kindness and a strength that is different and that I really appreciate where that's coming from. I really appreciate the way that you're showing up in the world, and if there's any way that I can support you, please, I am at your service, but I'll wait to be asked.
And I'll let you know exactly what I need so that you can serve the need.
Exactly. I won't anticipate it unless you ask.
No. Thank you so much.
That's a fun place to end it. But thank you so much, Tanya. And, to everybody watching, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Take care.